Well, it's one of those days when perhaps it looks like everything is standing still and everything is remaining the same, but it's not. Because the United Nations General Assembly opened today and President Obama was the first speaker. He made a speech of historic proportions. He defined the foreign policy, the global policy of the United States of America, dealing with tough issues like what do you do when crimes against humanity are being carried out within a nation, and yet it's an interior conflict. The United Nations does not want to interfere in the internal affairs of a nation, but how long do you stand aside, especially when poison gas is being used on women and little children? Grappling with that issue, do we respect sovereignty to the point that we ignore the cries of women and children, or do we go over the top of sovereignty and allow the United Nations to be a world government of sorts, overpowering the traditional bounds of sovereignty and asserting the will of the community of nations? Well, that's the kinds of decisions that are being grappled with at the United Nations today as head of state after head of state after head of state make their way to the podium. It's a ritual that occurs one time each year. I actually attended as a journalist the 2005 United Nations General Assembly, and it is amazing as head of state after head of state come there to express to their fellow rulers the direction they believe that the world should go and what should be done and what else the United Nations should be responsible for doing. Well, President Obama, that's what happened today as he made his way to the podium of the United Nations. He actually sort of summed it all up in the beginning with this statement: today, I want to outline where the United States of America stands on these issues. So he grappled in his speech with many things, but it all boiled down to, where does the United States stand when it comes to choosing between sovereignty and intervening on the behalf of the individual? Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is not as simple as it seems, because what is a civil war to one is crimes against humanity to another. At what point will national sovereignty actually cease to exist? Now, way back in 1992, it was none other than Strobe Talbot that wrote in Time magazine, in the 21st century, national sovereignty as we have known it will cease to exist. We'll all answer to a single global authority. Now, is that where we're headed? Yes, it is. The Bible prophesies that's where we're headed. And it's all being driven by the frustration that many are feeling right now over the Syrian crisis. How does the world community stand aside while 100,000 people plus have been killed? Another 2 million are refugees. They've been forced to leave their homes, flee to neighboring communities such as Jordan, such as Turkey. How long does the world community stand aside? Now, do we have the power to take Bashar Assad down? There's no doubt. The United States of America has the power to take him down. However, Russia says, wait a minute, we don't agree with your values. We got rebels raising up. For example, who are the rebels? Who started this Arab Spring thing? Was it, in fact, a disturbance that was fomented by the CIA? Many people believe that is true, that the Central Intelligence Agency of America knows how to stir up these feelings. I mean, after all, when it all began down in Egypt and 1 million people showed up to demonstrate in Tahrir Square in downtown Cairo, did that just happen? Was it something in the water that said, wake up today and go demonstrate in Tahrir Square down in downtown Cairo? Or was this all orchestrated? And if it was orchestrated, Who was it orchestrated by, and who funded it? So did someone stir up the discontent against the Mubarak regime, and then quickly President Obama announced that Mubarak needed to step aside, needed to resign? Of course, Mubarak certainly felt that way, and the Muslim Brotherhood took power, and we quickly endorsed their government because it appeared that they were elected by a democratic election. Then they began to burn down churches, and they began to impose Sharia law on the populace. And now then the people rebelled and said, hey, we thought we wanted this, but we don't want this. We don't want to live under this kind of a restrictive regime. And so now then the army comes in and throws over the government. Okay, this is what we're dealing with here. Who is the supreme power that makes the judgment when a government stands or when it must be overthrown? Now, if that's going to be in the hands of the United Nations, what happens when a tyrannical dictator gets control of the United Nations? Who's going to tell that person no? You say, well, that's not going to happen. Well, the truth of the matter is the Bible prophesies just that. The Bible prophesies that a man worse than Adolf Hitler will gain control of this global governance system that we're setting up right now, and will end up installing the worst era of global tyranny the world has ever known. So many people at the United Nations, they're making speeches, they're well-meaning, they're trying to grapple with problems. And the answer they're coming up with is we need a one-world governmental system. We need a global government over the nations of the world that can overrule heads of state and impose its will. And we're all in the process, we're glorifying this one entity, this perfect one world government that would be trusted with making the decisions as to who rises and who falls, who rules and who doesn't. Obviously, if any national leader runs afoul and disagrees with the global governance structure, then that one's going to be marked for destruction. So that's the kind of heady things that is being discussed right now at the United Nations. Now, let me read a couple of excerpts from President Obama's speech. It's a long speech, but he's addressing in one particular section of the speech the situation in Syria. He said, the evidence is overwhelming. The Assad regime used weapons of mass destruction on August the 21st. UN inspectors gave a clear accounting that advanced rockets fired large quantities of sarin gas at civilians. These rockets were fired from a regime-controlled neighborhood and landed in opposition neighborhoods. It is an insult to human reason and to the legitimacy of this institution to suggest that anyone other than the regime carried out this attack. Now, while he's speaking, Vladimir Putin is sitting down there at the Russian table listening because Putin does not agree with this whatsoever. Putin is saying, we have evidence that the rebels fired this in order to create sympathy for the rebel cause and to get the international community to intervene against the Assad government on the side of the rebels, because the rebels are never going to win this battle alone. They're only going to win if they get help from the international community. So Putin is contending that this was were weapons that were fired by the rebels in order to gain international intervention. And Russia has veto power at the UN Security Council. So now we have a paralyzed UN, and this is the frustration that President Obama was attempting to deal with in his speech. Now, I'm going to sort of take you to the conclusion. However, there's a couple of things I want to make sure that you do not miss, because this is the most powerful man in the world speaking at the organization where all the heads of state come together. They have joined this organization called the United Nations, and it is literally designed to be a one-world government. It is becoming more and more that every day, because prior to 2005 and the time they adopted the responsibility to protect resolution, prior to that, the United Nations was strictly confined to arbitrating between nations But in 2005, when they issued the outcome statement that nations now have the responsibility to protect citizens against unscrupulous leaders, now who's going to judge? Who's going to decide when a ruler steps over the line? Now, President Obama is saying when he used chemical weapons, that's when he stepped over the line, because 98% of the world has said chemical weapons should be outlawed. The problem is, though, Assad says, I didn't do it. Somebody else did it. So now we've got to try to figure out who's lying, who's telling the truth. Well, it just seems like there is no answer. Anyway, during his speech, President Obama said the Syrian government took a first step by giving an accounting of its stockpiles. Now there must be a strong Security Council resolution to verify that the Assad regime is keeping its commitments, and there must be consequences if they fail to do so. If we cannot agree even on this, then it will show that the United Nations is incapable of enforcing the most basic of international laws. So again, President Obama is grappling with, is the United Nations even worth having? Is it really paralyzed when push comes to shove? Can the UN actually enforce the most basic of international laws? Now, if you have international law and it cannot be enforced, then all it is a house of cards. All it is cotton candy. It means nothing. So that's what we're dealing with here. But if you start enforcing it, then guess what you no longer have? You no longer have national sovereignty. If there is a world government that's able to assert its influence over the top of national government, then you no longer have sovereignty. You now have done what Strobe Talbot said. In the 21st century, national sovereignty will cease to exist. We'll all answer to a single global authority. Well, President Obama is attempting to grapple with that in his speech. He finally said it's time for Russia and Iran to realize that insisting on Assad's rule will lead directly to the outcome that they fear, an increasingly violent space for extremists to operate. We'll tell you more as we continue this edition of Politics and Religion.